Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to class. We will talk about William Labov's Social Stratification of English in New York City, 1966. As we have already talked about William Labov as a social linguist, as a variationist, as the pioneer of the variationist tradition in social linguistics. Today we'll talk about the second case study and a very influential work by Labov carried out in New York City. As we talked about in our earlier video as well, Labov was born in 1927, Rutherford, New Jersey, USA. He had a family business, so he majored in English, philosophy, and also studied chemistry at Harvard. And he worked as an industrial chemist for quite a long time before moving to linguistics in 61. He carried out his first study from 61 to 63 in Martha's Vineyard Island, right, 3 miles off East Coast in US. This study used a novel technique, method and approach which would become prominent in his next case study in New York study, and then he becomes an influencer and a pioneer in carrying out all kinds of research on speech and variation by imitating and drawing major techniques and procedures and approaches from his work in England and other parts of America, in Canada. The major work by Peter Treadgill as his PhD work, Peter Treadgill's work, that is based on Labov's methods and techniques. Sankoff, D. Sankoff and G. Sankoff's project on French in Canada, for that matter, Yorkshire's speech by Betite. So lots of people drew from these methods, and his method would be inspire a variety of works which are the major source of inspiration and literature in social linguistics. So in that series we'll talk about Labov's Social Stratification of English in New York City, 1966 work. That is the second case study he carried out. Social stratification. What do we mean by that? So the condition of being arranged in social strata or classes within a group. So hierarchy, right? Lower social class, upper social class, middle social class, socioeconomic class, upper, lower, middle. So variety of factors that determine placing of a particular group at a particular strata in the society, within the group, right? And what is correlation? The linguistic structure and the social structure, do they correspond to each other? Is there any connection between the two? Do they correlate? So Labov's study establishes the fact that social determinants like gender, age, class, etc. they do have, and they do have influence and are embedded in the linguistic structures. So he was the one who demonstrated with data empirically that linguistic structures are correlated with social structures. So their social and linguistic structures and social structures are correlates. This is the major finding that he established in his 2 case studies. This is, look at the pictures. There are 3 locations he chose for his study, where, you know, stores like the stores like, Saks Fifth Avenue, which was the highest in social ranking, socioeconomic class. Mackay's store, that was middle social ranking, and Esclane, lower social ranking. So very categorically he chose 3 kinds of locations and 3 kinds of stores which correspond to socioeconomic class. So Saks Fifth Avenue, the highest socioeconomic class, then Mackay's store, which is a middle socioeconomic class, and Esclane store, which was lowest socioeconomic class. So after choosing 3 locations and 3 stores based on the socioeconomic class, the customers and the people who work there, they belong to. So people and the regular visitors of the store at Esclan belong to lower socioeconomic class. The employees, salesmen, saleswomen, and the customers who visited Mackay's store belong to middle socio-economic class, and the employees or the salesmen and women and visitors belong to higher social economic class at Saks Fifth Avenue. So after considering this class, by the way, before he moved into these locations, he also carried out informal pilot studies across New York by tape recording a lot of casual speech of different people, and after identifying the linguistic variable, he tried to empirically verify that those variables in these 3 locations, and this is popularly known as the New York study or the 4th floor survey. In literature you also find the 4th floor survey by Labov. So the 3 departmental stores show different levels of prestige, right? So Saks Fifth Avenue, the highest one, Mackay's the middle one, and Esclane the lowest one. And the work at either store is valued accordingly in the study. And what is the prediction? The persons will be stratified according to these levels and will show respective linguistic features. So the people belonging to these 3 different socioeconomic classes will also, they can be ranked, if they can be ranked in terms of socioeconomic class, their linguistic structures and use of language can also be ranked according to this hierarchy. So this linguistic hierarchy and social hierarchy, linguistic structures and ranking and social structures and ranking are correlated. That was the hypothesis and principle with which we started working on this case study. Now, for this study, Labov looked at sound ra, the trill sound ra, and the prediction was that this ra sound in the words like for, car, will be more prominent and used more at Saks Fifth Avenue than the people at Esclane. So the people with higher strata will tend to use this sound more as compared to the people at the lowest strata. This was the idea. So, the hypothesis was that the linguistic variable Ra differentiates English in New York City, and in terms of differentiation, in terms of style, status, position of the occurrence, and the age group. So, status, it correlates with the social class. So, people at Saks Fifth Avenue will tend to use it more than the people at Esclane, lower socioeconomic class. Style, if formality increases, I'll tell you, he used to go and ask, where can I find the ladies' shoe, for that example, for example, and it was on 4th floor. So, here you have ra sound, the trill sound in both the words, 4th in the middle of the word, floor, end of the word, right? So, post-vocalic. So, you would go and ask randomly to these sales people, where can I find ladies' shoe? Or he would ask a particular shoe or a particular floor, and then he would see, he would record, and sometimes, he would say, excuse me, I did not hear it, and then the person would loudly repeat it again, but this time the mode was more formal, right? So, first time it was casual, but when you say excuse me again, so it becomes more formal. So, if formality increases, ra usages increases as well. Position of occurrence, more likely at the end of the words than before the consonant. So, this sound becomes prominent more at the word final position than in the middle position or non-initial position, non-final position. Age, this feature or this tendency of hypercorrection, this tendency of pronouncing it prominently was found more in young age groups, lower age groups. So, this was the hypothesis and this was the idea with which it started. Data collection was done very cleverly. He maintained observer's paradox. And what is that? Observer's paradox, is all about creating a situation which is non-threatening, non-hostile, and which allows the speaker to come up with natural speech. That means you are not intimidating. The presence of the interviewer and the presence of the observer, the presence of tape recorder, all these things intimidate and forces a high degree of formality. So, you don't find natural speech at natural speed. So, it's important to maintain that, to minimize the conscious presence of the observer. So, he maintained that, and all the speeches he recorded, all the samples he recorded were natural, and they could never know, the respondents or the people whom he recorded could never make out that he is recording and he is doing it deliberately. And he multiplied it many times with many different people at all levels, all floors, right? So, he tried to find informal and casual speech, and in this case, interviewer was in the role of a customer. So, he would pretend to be a customer looking for a particular product and who is not aware of the location where he can find the product. So, he would go and ask and he would get a response to his question and he would record. Sometimes he would make the person or the interviewee repeat what he or she said, and he would cleverly record it. So, interviewer in the role of a customer and informants did not know that their language is being investigated and recorded. So, questions like, where can I find ladies' shoes? A normal question to any salesperson on a floor, particular floor, and it was located on 4th floor. So he was more interested in the response, 4th floor, where you find R sound in the middle of the word, and in the second word, it is at the word final position. So occurrence of R sound, the trill, in the middle and post vocalic at the final position, and he would see the prominence of R in the speech, and he would make them repeat by asking it again, and it became more emphatic and clear. So this was the technique he used in data collection. Now if you look at this finding and the status, percentage of use of R sound in the 3 New York City departmental stores, you can find the pronunciation of post-vocalic R functions as a marker of highest ranking status group. It was prominent in Sachs, Mackay and Esclane. You can see the graph where you have all R, that is denoted with dark shade, some R pronunciation that is denoted with little lighter shade, and no R at all denoted in white shade. And what you see in Esclane, in this repeated emphatic speech, we find some R sound. It is a sense of hypercorrection among the young people at this lowest socioeconomic class. At Sachs, you find even distribution, and Mackay somewhat more. So it is almost like it can be predictable. What hypothesis with which it started is confirmed in terms of status. Then the style. So the more formal the situation, the more use of post-vocalic R, right? And that denoted the social class and style of speech in these 3 departmental stores as far as R pronunciation is concerned. If you look at the position of occurrence, the R pronunciation is more common at the end of the word than before a consonant. So post-vocalic R was more prominent than its occurrence elsewhere, with a consonant for that matter. When you look at the age, Sachs and Esclane, older people used less R pronunciation than the younger people. So it was a tendency. At Mackay's, older people used more R pronunciation than the younger people. And what we can conclude out of it, variable R is not generally a feature of young people. Number 1. Number 2, members of middle social age group tend to change their pronunciation after adolescence, right? So these younger people, when they grow, that it changes, and it is not prominent in the highest age group and the lowest social groups, right? What we can deduct out of it? So speakers, and look at the hypothesis with which he started. They all came true, and they were all empirically verified in this study. Okay, so if we look at the methods, approach and technique, that is separate, but look at the main outcome or the deduction that we can make out of it, and the whole idea of establishing a correlation between linguistic structure and social structure is established and verified in this study. The speakers who are ranked in a scale of social stratification will be ranked in the same order by the different use of linguistic variable, and in this case it was R sound. Socioeconomic differences cannot be ignored in linguistic studies. This is the major claim which is empirically verified, and that opened a new frontier in social linguistics and became the core central thrust in study of variation and change. Because if you recall, linguistic changes were studied before such studies done by Labov, and that was done in terms of dialectology. And in dialectology, no reference or no attention was paid to the social aspect of language use, right? So there, it was more of a geographical location and geographical distance and the linguistic variability and variation in linguistic structures. They started with rural, untraveled, old-aged people as their sample, and it was a bias sample, of course, because they believe that the people who are not traveled, they will preserve the original form of the speech. Old people will preserve because young people travel and their speech may vary and be influenced by the other varieties. So in dialectology, they focused on older people, remote locations, rural locations they're located in, and people who did not travel. Later on, in 20th century, we see urban dialectology, where they focused on speech samples of the urban cities. And this study, particularly New York City study, and another case study, Martha's Vineyard Island study, both the studies carried out by William Labov with a different approach and technique established the fact that variation in linguistic structures are not random. Linguistic structures reflect the social structures, right? And the social determinants like age, like gender, like class, they do have influence and are embedded in the linguistic structure. So they are correlates. So linguistic variation and social variation, they are correlates, and that's what we can deduct out of this study as well, where speakers who are ranked in a scale of social stratification will be ranked in the same order by the different use of a linguistic variable. The important point is how to recognize or identify these linguistic variables, and then how these linguistic variables become social variables and how they are ranked, how they are correlated. So Labov established a very direct relationship between linguistic structure and social structure, and this is the major original contribution by William Labov in the study of language use. It is known as the variationist tradition, language and variation, and he initiated a new practice and a new technique, a new approach for looking at language and its use in the real socio-cultural context. And here he brings in the variation in linguistic structure corresponds to variation in social structure or vice versa, because variation in social structure through these linguistic variables can be predicted, and what he predicted, hypothesized, was completely verified in his New York study, right? So finally, what we can deduct, that socioeconomic differences in class within the same speech community cannot be ignored in linguistic studies, and they become a factor. And this is how a newly emerging discipline called sociolinguistics got a major thrust, a central thrust on studying language and variation studies in variation became central theme of sociolinguistics. So this is the contribution of Labov, and His other works, like Language in the Inner City, for that matter, where he studied Afro-American vernacular English, and he argued that it should not be treated as a perverted version of standard English, but it should be treated as a variety of English in its own right, which has a clear pattern, grammatical pattern, and social usage of it. He worked on narratives. He also worked on people's account of their life, and the methods and techniques he used inspired many others to replicate the same study at different locations with different samples. And that is why he is regarded as one of the founding fathers of sociolinguistics, who gave a new technique, a new approach, a new method to look at language and its use in the real socio-cultural context. His approach and technique stands in opposition to Chomsky's approach and technique to understand and study language. So, though he never started any movement against Chomsky, but his methods, approach, and techniques definitely, created a separate category of his scholars who looked at language from this perspective. In this continued series, we'll talk about people like Dalhams, people like Gumpers, people like Basil Bernstein, who worked on code and class, people like Joshua Fishman, who worked on sociology of language, people like Charles Ferguson, whose major contribution is on diglossia. So in our next video, we'll take up all these people one by one, and we'll talk about their journey as a social linguist, and we'll also talk about their major contributions in the discipline and the influence of these works in overall understanding of language. So this is it for now. We'll meet in the next video and talk about some other scholar. So thank you very much.